Hi, everybody. Welcome to the panel about Metaverse and XR. I actually can't remember the title of this panel because it's kind of obscure. My name is Ted Drake. I'm the Global Accessibility and Inclusive Design Leader for Intuit. I'm also a co-program chair for this year's CSUN ATC conference. And we had a discussion about how we could bring some new conversations to the CSUN ATC conference, but also in this special room of being able to host some panel discussions. And I wanted to embrace the philosophy of the CSUN ATC conference, where it's not just web development, it's not just inclusive design, but we also have rehabilitation, we also have education. And I've always appreciated the fact that when I go to a CSUN conference, I can go to the different tracks and learn a wide spectrum of knowledge. So with today's conversation, I reached out to a few leaders. Dr. Roger Kashalnagar is from Gallaudet University, and he's been working with him and his students have been working, and I'll let him describe it himself. They've been working with communication though, with Zoom, with XR, with artificial intelligence. So there's a lot about communication and community. Eric Yates is a neurorehabilitation therapist, physical therapist, if I remember correctly. So he's been working with how XR can actually be used in the process of helping people heal neurologically, but also physically. And finally, Mark Barley, who's part of the Able Gamers from the very early days of video gaming. He's been making video games accessible for people with all different types of body types and abilities. So I'm going to start off by just telling you about what XR and Metaverse means to me. I'm not an expert on this, which is one reason why I'm really excited about this panel. But I've been following it for many years. And the first thing I ever saw was something, I believe it's called Snow World. And I saw when I was at the University of Washington for an event. And the concept was that when someone is recovering from a burn, the senses of your body for pain and is very close to the senses of your body for heat. And so if they were able to put someone with a virtual reality goggles on, and they embedded them into a snowy, icy, cold environment. So they're on a toboggan and they're sliding down a hill and they're throwing snowballs at snowmen and they're playing games. If they could be embedded in freezing cold temperatures while they're going through the process of cleaning the burn wounds, they found that they were able to reduce the pain medication by 30%. And that was the first time I had ever heard of virtual reality actually having a physical impact on people. And ever since then, this was probably like 14 years ago, I've always been kind of curious and watched the progression of how we're using XR, augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and then now we're coming into the metaverse, how these are going to impact people from different abilities, communities. With that, I'd like to have Dr. Kashalnagar start the conversation, an introduction himself and what XR and metaverse means to him.
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Dr. Raja Kashalnagar, and I don't care how you pronounce my name. I care how you spell my name, because my first language is written English. I don't know how, or my interpreters, read that. It's important to how we read that. The reason I say that, it shows that language has many different methods, not just spoken or print or the VR reality, and we'll approach that later. Now, what the metaverse means to me, it's exciting new opportunities. There's a lot of new potential to meeting gamers and just resources out there, new ways of accessing information as well. The old approach of access wasn't always compatible within a virtual reality environment. For example, having an interpreter. If you're listening to sound, where's the interpreter where those captions should be? Or should it be next to the sound? Should it be behind the interpreter? Things like that. Attention getting. It's a long history of game development and thinking about how to make compatible sounds with visual attention getting in games. Now, on the flip side, in other environments, there are new challenges that we can discuss later, including the similarities and differences between audiological information, and we'll save that for the next question.
And Eric?
Yeah, so being a therapist who's been treating with virtual reality for a little over 5 years, approaching 6 years now, when I think of just XR and Metaverse, I see hope. I see new ways of connectivity that are really exciting. And not to digress or get too much into it, but I see the chances of greater levels of isolation happening. And so I'm hopeful and scared. At the same time, being such a hands-on therapist, things are tangible, things are always hands-on with me as a therapist. So yeah, so I'm excited and scared at the same time, but I'm sure we'll get more into that later.
So yeah, my name is Mark Barley. I'm not really sure why I'm on the couch. These two gentlemen are incredibly smart. I'm a gamer, and I have no idea what the metaverse is because I think it's become a lump all for just about anything that's happening in this space. So I'm not really sure if I'm not sure I've been there, but I might have. I don't know when I got there or if I was there. As a person who really approaches, this industry from a gaming perspective, I think there's a lot of struggles in gaming that we're gonna probably jump into on experiences people are wanting to have in these spaces. In the technology, I'm really looking forward to AR. Like, the part of this whole world that really excites me is the augmented reality part of it. As a neurodiverse individual myself, just some of the things I'm starting to tacitly see this augment bring, I'm really excited about the future in that space. The VR gaming space, I don't know if Facebook is gonna have enough money to truly make it happen, but they're trying.
Dr. Kushal, I do have a few questions that we went over. Let me just start. One of his students gave a presentation, I think he's in the row, yesterday about consent. And how do you give consent within a study using American Sign Language? So we're kind of used to like a form that you might read and then you put your signature on there. But for someone that uses American Sign Language, English is not necessarily their first language. So how can we provide that same information but within sign language and video? And then how do they acknowledge? Instead of hitting a yes button, there's the possibility that you record them doing a sign saying I consent or I do not consent. And then the signature could be them signing their name. So the concept is that consent is not a blanket experience. It can be customized for whoever needs to give consent. And privacy is another issue. And I was at a conference with W3C and they were talking about privacy. And one of the things they said is, as a gamer, imagine I'm a gamer, I'm doing augmented reality. And it may even be a game that recognizes American Sign Language. So perhaps I'm working with someone, but what about the people in the background? What about maybe if I'm in a coffee shop and there's two people in the corner that are speaking in American Sign Language to each other? All of a sudden, their conversation is potentially being recorded. We have privacy issues where people are passive participants, that perhaps they're not the ones using the game, but their privacy is potentially being invaded. And that's a potential issue with the metaverse, where you have this artificial world that you're walking through and communicating in, but are we watching someone perhaps using American Sign Language that they're not part of our conversation, but we're still able to pick that up? Or what are some of the other privacy requirements or concerns that you may have with metaverse, with XR, even with virtual meetings and such, like Zoom?
That's a very interesting question that you bring up. To become a real world, to apply real world experience to the virtual world experience, we'd have to dive down between audiological information and visual information and show the differences and similarities and the expectation of privacy. Like, for example, audiological information, it falls off twice the distance. So every time you have a distance, you double it. So the sound falls off a quarter of the way. And it's very quick. So you can't hear it, you can't understand it. It impacts the privacy bubble. You know that you're having a quiet conversation, like if we're talking between the two of us, the audience can't hear it, so you'd have to speak up for the audience to be able to hear it. So you have that bubble. So the expectation is here inside, but with sign, I could sign between us and the entire audience can see. So the visual linearly is a lot easier to see at a distance than to hear at a distance. So signing deaf advantage or deaf gain, signing at a distance across the street or on a different floor is very easy. And it's really cool, it's really nice. But on the flip side, how to sign privately or like at a whisper, there's no hidden signs. So the expectation of privacy is very different. Now, sign language is one type of privacy expectation in the VR space, again, according to attention getting. But audiology, people rely on transferring audiological information maybe into captions. Now, the distance, what point should the caption stop? If I'm in the VR space and I have access to everything, who should be allowed to listen to what should we be allowed to listen to, or what should we be allowed to read if everybody in the space is around me, if there's somebody that's close to me. So there's differences. It's an interesting challenge to include that, to go from audiological information to visual information. It may be that we get an avatar of an interpreter where it's visual and audiological information. The privacy expectation would match. So that's a very interesting question that our research group has been continuing to investigate. And hopefully we'll present that in the near future, and we are definitely welcome to more feedback around that. Also, in the VR space, now with captioning guiding the rules, it's very clear about, on a TV, it's 2D. The captions in the virtual reality, you're in a 3D environment, it's not clear where to show the captions or where to show an interpreter. Like I said before, should the captions be with the sound or in front of the viewer? Or should it move with the eye gaze? That's, again, we presented information on that yesterday. It's been excellent research, and it's a great question. We're looking at advancing the technology. The last comment I'll make about this, one time I used caption glasses, and I love where I was able to bike with my son and have a conversation and read what he was saying in the glasses than having to look at him when he was signing at me. So, I mean, there's new freedom of use in AR, whether it be glasses or VR. You know, I can look at other things while I'm reading at the same time. And I mean, that's what the potential of the metaverse is. And you have to answer those tough questions first before you can take on a project like that. It's great to have deaf and other individuals with disabilities involved in that discussion and doing that research. And on the flip side, 100 years ago, you had silent movies where deaf and hearing both had the full access to that information on the screen. And then within 2 years, all movies had sound, you know, talkies. So within 2 or 3 years, all deaf people lost that access to movies. One person wrote a beautiful phrase: loss of access to movies is dream of throwing words onto the screen. And today now we have captions, but 50 years ago, we had no access until the deaf community fought to have captioning added. And you know, we don't want to wait 50 years to lose access to information in the virtual world. We want that from the get-go, and we thank you. You know, we appreciate conferences like this.
That reminds me of the blind film critic. If anybody's familiar with it, he did a video. His first video was talking about one of the action films. And the last 30 minutes of the film was nothing but explosions and car chases. And there was no dialogue. So he had like 20 to 30 minutes of nothingness. So he created a review about it from a blind perspective. And Ebert picked it up and he shared it across. And overnight, he became like a celebrity. But it's the same thing. Until we had audio descriptions, some of those movies were really hard to watch. Eric, you also talked about privacy. He was talking about how in HIPAA with health, some of the health information, even if it's just, you know, how far does someone move their legs or raise their arms, is potentially shared data if you're not preparing your equipment and your data to make sure patient security. Did you want to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and that, you know, that's being a gamer myself, you know, long history of gaming, I think since like 92. You know, I've been gaming for a long time now. I may look young, but I have been gaming since I was like 6, back in 92. But anyway, so yeah, so when it comes to being able to bring gaming into physical rehabilitation, I was like, this is literally the coolest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. But through my excitement, after digesting everything I had just done for the first, like, you know, the first little testing session with virtual reality, I was like, but what about movement? What about the data being tracked with this? Although I see a high score and I'm like, you just got an A+, like that's so cool. But I was like, but I don't know where that data just went. You know, like that could be now targeting new exercises just for new applications on this marketplace just because they may have raised their arm and maybe did some fast movements for like 5 or 10 minutes. And for me, that was a little scary, especially just in our Practice Act and in state jurisdictions of rehab. You know, the patient's privacy has to remain that way, no ifs, ands, or buts. And that made me horrified, thinking that even though this was testing, we had consent given, that there was still a chance that that data wasn't theirs, nor could I even see it, other than just like a fancy 3D virtual A+. So, you know, that's kind of, yeah.
I did want to ask you a question because you're dealing with neurorehabilitation. XR has the ability to engage with neuroplasticity and memory. I remember one of the things people were worried about is that could a game actually trigger PTSD or other issues because it can actually have like a false memory of the game. What are the benefits and warnings of using technology that immerses the person in an alternate environment?
Okay, So you want the good or the bad first, right? No, I'm just kidding. We'll go ahead and start with the benefits. Some of the really big benefits that I've seen is that I'm able to take my patient out of their norm, their norm of going inside of a rehab facility, seeing the same walls, seeing the same therapist, and instead I kind of get to make them the hero of this story, which is their path to recovery, which is really incredible. Every movement that they do, every high score that they get, or every item they grab in a simulated grocery store, it's all led by them. They're not grabbing anything out of my hand. They are the ones inside the grocery store. They are the ones performing these actions, and I'm just sitting back in awe because I'm not having to give them any cues at all. The technology is giving them the visual cues, the auditory cues, and the haptic feedback necessary to give them their implicit feedback, which is incredible. So those are the big benefits, being able to distract the user from their inabilities, from their disabilities, but instead focusing more on their strength. And I get to tailor that VR device or that exercise in real time so they get to see those strengths and they get to see these goals being acquired in real time. So those are the big benefits that I've noticed just in my time treating it. I'm gonna kind of travel back in time a little bit back when I was in high school. I was highly addicted to video games. Video games, shockingly enough, I almost saw them as like the protagonist and the people I would meet in these virtual spaces. I could probably even say I saw them as more friends than I did just inanimate objects I was interacting with in a non-immersive VR space, right? For those who do play games, Mass Effect is one I'll never forget. Traveling through space, talking with people, building these crazy relationships. When I think back to it, I'm like, that's a little scary because I see them as like old friends, which is crazy to think about. So
That's good story. That's good storytelling.
great, yeah, BioWare, if you're listening, great job. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. But, but anyways, that also, on the other page, that is also one of the scary things is now that you can be fully submersed in that, what if there's a day where maybe I do put, say, a younger kid in there now, 14, 15 years old. Say I'm treating them, I'm like, hey, we have these goals we're gonna hit, but I'm gonna take you out of the rehab center to do that. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Well, here's a pair of goggles, let's get to it, right? That's a lot of times how I talk about VR to my patients. But now I need to be cognizant because I'm like, well, if they are maybe possibly having that same addiction, are they gonna wanna actually get out? Or are they gonna be so immersed in here that maybe they're more happy with the way that they seem in virtual reality than outside of virtual reality, if that makes sense. I haven't seen a lot of that anecdotally, because I'm just kind of speaking from my own perspective here, but just as the times go by, that's one thing that I start to kind of fear, just because I used to be heavily addicted, and if I had this back in the day, I really don't think I would have really wanted, to get out of there.
I'll challenge you a little bit, though, on
I'd
the
love it.
heavily addicted part, because almost all of the research studies that look around the addictiveness of games have really fatal flaws that end up kind of falling apart. Gaming, because it's an experience, because it, does the endorphins we can have a lot of time, is great for escapism. It's something we look for in games. We talked about it in some research. We talked about it if you talked to my talk this morning. But the fact you're an accomplished adult that's, clearly doing it, that is not the outcome of an addict. The truth is. So you were enamored with games and you were excited about what they brought to you. But I would be really cautious about using the term addicted because I don't think that that's true. And there's very little evidence in the fact that that path is as keenly easy to fall into as you would expect. So, don't be so hard on yourself.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And like I said, I'm predominantly speaking just, from my own experience more than anything of just because, once I got out of high school, I really did kind of have to fight.
Of course,
Yeah.
because
To break out of it. There was new experiences coming, new opportunities to start. I mean, that's why I'm here now, right?
Yep.
And so, I do think alternate timeline, right? Alternate timeline. What if I didn't fight to break away from that? So
your parents would have eventually kicked you out of the basement and you would have ended up having to walk away anyway. Come on. Most of us are gamers and then we get adulthood kind of hits us and we have to put it aside for a while.
Sure, yeah, and that definitely makes sense. I do sometimes feel the clutches to name drop another game, Elden Ring. If anybody knows that
it's
one,
terrible. I
okay?
haven't played it.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
No, it's not.
I love it. It's so good. Anyways, there we go. I just said I love a video game. No, I'm just
But you
kidding.
can't, look,
But yeah.
I love Mass Effect, okay? Right now, I wish I was playing Fallout 4 instead of being here. I get it.
Well, the conversation brings me to what I was going to ask you, Mark, and that's about communities. Because that's one of the things you talked about in your presentation today was that of the key benefits of why people game is the fact that they have communities. So what I'd like to know is how do you feel about the potential of more of these communities becoming virtual? And in the case of the metaverse, these communities where you're seeing avatars and you're in spaces that could be anything, and you're spending money on virtual houses and fashion, stuff like that.
I don't know about spending money on a virtual house. So I think one of the powers of VR, and I've used it myself, so I'll just tell you my own story, which is, during the height of COVID, I was leaning into my VR in a couple of ways. One of the ways was, and you alluded it to in your introduction, which was I was looking to get away. I was stuck in my house. I was basically going to the office by myself. All of my staff members were working from home, so it was just me driving from the office by myself to my house. And I binged, I can't remember what I binged, but in the Netflix app on VR. I have a perfectly good 80-inch television with surround sound in my living room, but I just wanted to not be in my house for an afternoon. So I was actually looking at VR as an escape to be by myself. But at the same time, I wasn't able to connect with my friends, and there's some really great apps like Big Screen and things that are there. And I was inviting my friends, my small group of friends, to watch something together in a VR space, and because I missed them and we couldn't get together physically. I personally find some of the more open world parts of VR to be very jarring. I was actually having a discussion over dinner last night. We're walking around here and we all know something about each one of us, which is we care about disabilities, we care about this. But I have not consistently walked up to total strangers and says, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Because they're the social norms that we have in a physical space. They're not in a lot of these VR spaces. A lot of experiences that Facebook have created through their horizons and everything like that. People are very bold at walking up to you and engaging you in really forward ways that I find incredibly uncomfortable. And so to your community question, I'm seeing people use VR to build communities, oftentimes to rekindle or to grow communities that started in a physical world. But I think the biggest struggle we're finding in in the work that's going on is that some of these experiences of just let's throw everyone in a big room, because we don't have those social norms, actually turns people off from those spaces. I mean, my own example, I get into Horizons and all of a sudden I have an 8-year-old kid standing in front of me going, hey, where are you at? What are you doing? What's going on? And I'm like, I don't deal with 8-year-old children, much less random ones. So I think I will say this one story. So Dr. Chris Power, who is a user researcher who actually built APX that I talked about this morning, he was a real doubter. And you mind if I use you as an example?
Please.
So he's a real doubter of VR. And in the early days of the Quest, they had this little VR room. Do you remember that thing where you had the TV and the okay? So basically imagine you had a little table out on a balcony, and then you had a place where you could get TV. And I bought him one of those Quest Go's. And we were sitting where this little couch, like you and I are sitting now. And he's like, so we're talking and everything like that. And he goes, no, Mark, you don't understand. Look at me. What I'm trying to say is da-da-da-da. And I said, Chris, hold on a second. He goes, no, let me get my point. I said, Chris, stop. I said, I'm 5,000 miles away from you right now. And he went, oh my God, you're right. Because he turned to me and wanted my little plastic avatar, because those avatars were terrible in that little thing, if you remember. But he wanted me to make eye contact because he had this point. He believed, that's the power to me. He believed we were in the same room. And then he was like, oh, now I get it. So I think there's opportunities for intimate community, small community. You can have really great conversations with people that are nowhere near you. I don't know if I would want to go to a virtual CSUN.
Yeah, I went to the Afrotech conference in a metaverse type experience, and it was, in some ways, it was nicer because my avatar danced a lot better than I can.
Fair.
And some of the social, like nervousness was away. I didn't mind like people coming up to me because I was there to actually meet people. So some versions of the metaverse, but at the same time, it was really clumsy. It was like, why do I have to walk out to the street, turn around, go over a fountain in order to watch a video?
But was your conference, there was a thesis to the conference though, just like there is for here at CSUN. And I think that's very different than some of these just general, like, let's all cluster in a park rando type things.
We've got about 10 minutes left. I've got one question that came up. I was actually speaking with, I don't know if he's in the room, James Craig earlier today. And the question was about timing. And I think that might be something that works with all three of you. The timing consideration. For instance, how does a video game or a VR or a metaverse adapt to someone that may need more time? Raja, I was thinking for you, sometimes there's a timing issue where you need to connect with a VRS. If it was, for instance, we're in a metaverse and we need to click off the metaverse in order to do an interview. And we need to make sure that there's time for the video relay service to be connected. And then, Eric, you're dealing with timing all the time. But if all three of you can maybe say something about the role of timing in different ways in VR and metaverse.
Well, I'll say that VR, as you alluded to, it's a new communication. Anytime you can type, which is cool. You can send messages to each other if you can't speak. But the typing takes a long time. So yeah, that could be a challenge sometimes. Some communication is better than none, for example. And sometimes converting auditory information to visual information takes time. What's going on and what the auditory output is, or looking at an interpreter, going back and forth, that takes additional time. So if it's not live, it could take a little bit more time to get all the critical information than if it was live. Then it would be a lot more easier. You could communicate between each other, but yeah, you would need a little bit more time than if it was just automatic. Something to consider. Right now, typing is very important to get information out. Yeah. To get information out, and as well as VRS, yeah, time is critical.
And Eric?
Yeah, so for mine, especially when I'm working on just promoting neuroplasticity with neuro-based patients, I need time to do thousands upon thousands of repetition. So for me, it's adapting a VR environment through the use of our wonderful developers, at least at NeuroRehab VR, to where I can just work on that same repetition of normal functionalized movements, but in a fun way. And say, being able to have the control as a therapist of maybe even initially, maybe that first session, slowing it down to where we're just doing a part of it. Like maybe we're just working on the wrist portion of it. And then maybe the next session, we include the elbow section of it. And then the last session, that's when we include that. And then every session after that, we can just work on full-blown movement the entire time. So timing, I really feel like with VR, it's a benefit of VR, because as a therapist and as, when it comes to specific VR, so specific rehab-based VR, I can customize it to really be, to have the subjective timing required for the reacquisition of normal movement for my neuro-based patients.
Yeah, we work a lot, like I said, for games and game companies, and I want to first recognize that game companies that focus on creating VR experiences, they are asking questions around accessibility. And I mean, I say that to say from this technology, we're asking these questions sooner in the life cycle of a technology than we have almost anything in the past. And I think that's worth recognizing, the XR Access projects and things like that. We are, we're not 12 years down the road before someone finally said, have we thought about how people with disabilities might use this? Which is oftentimes what we see. We have a design pattern we teach developers called slow it down. And it really is, especially since we've got a lot of single player experiences in the VR space, there's really nothing that's stopping them from just frankly slowing that down so that someone who might have a physical disability or a neurodiverse disability or just whatever reason they just want to slow it down can just slow the whole thing down. So game companies are talking about this and trying to figure out how to bring accessibility. I'd love to talk about where does closed captioning go, because we've asked that question all the time, like what should it do? Should it be three-dimensional and always look like the beginning of Star Wars? What should it do? So I think, I just want to lend that people are having these conversations so soon in this life cycle, and I'm really excited about that.
We do have time for audience questions. If anybody has an audience question, there'll be a microphone coming to you.
Yeah, thank you all for the great panel. It was very exciting to hear the different perspectives. One of the experiences I had that one of the panelists talked about was during the pandemic, kind of reconnecting with my colleagues at work through the virtual workspace, and how, I think you hit the nail right on the head around the community already existed, the relationships already existed, and we were using that virtual space as a more human form of connecting with each other as a group than two-dimensional screens on a VC call. So I felt like that was really relevant. But where we hit the wall was trust, because these platforms that are developing these are very large platforms. They're gigantic companies developing these platforms, and they don't always have the best reputations for trust. And so in a workspace setting or in a sensitive environment, I think this also came up around, like, where's this data going? What can I actually say here that I'm free to say that and am I sure that data is not going into the databases of these companies? Is there a future that we see where these technologies are miniaturized, or they're scaled, or that maybe our devices are capable of running local versions of these environments, or walled garden sort of environments? Or do we kind of have to get to a point where some company has developed these things that does have a better reputation for trust?
So I will say one of my favorite places to connect with my friends. So I didn't do a lot of workplace VR because frankly, I don't want to go into VR to work. There's one called Chat VR as an app that you can get. And I actually went and looked at all of their privacy stuff before we jumped in there, because I think what you said is correct. I have, personally, I left Facebook 5 years ago and have never looked back because of that very reason. So I think right now it's the wild, wild west of privacy. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I really resonated with just like reconnecting with the communities. I did it through something called Discord.
Yeah,
I use Discord all the time. I never ventured into the VR space because, to be honest, I'm from a very small town in Texas, to where like VR devices still they're really not found. But I work in Dallas and Fort Worth, so.
I live in West Virginia. You can't really.
Okay,
yes.
there we go. So, but yeah, I agree. I think it's just kind of the wild, wild west, and I think just even living in the world that we're in now, sadly enough, I've just kind of accepted it. However, with things like there's like VPNs all across the marketplace, and there's like all these, even new social medias that are coming out. I do see eventually there being some development to where like you do have to have like the secret access code to like the APK to download on your headset and kind of go from there. So I actually do kind of see that as being something that's probably already being looked at today.
I think we'll see more of it in the AR space as well, just because I think the type of data, the type of things we're going to see in the way of where AR is going to go, we're going to demand privacy on it. Like, I would love to have glasses that help me navigate when I'm walking around, but I don't necessarily want it to be advertising every restaurant that I'm going by, because to me, that's not a good user experience.
Roger, did you have?
There's no more functional equivalency. We have speech to text or captions, and I wish we had more connection to trust. Like, who is speaking? What are their emotions like? It's still not there yet. That's where the interpreter helps. I mean, some things are better, some aren't yet. But we still don't have that full connection in that VR space yet with AI services. I'm looking forward to that improving, but we don't want to give up that fight on privacy. AI depends a lot on a lot of data. Unfortunately, how to collect that data without giving up privacy, that's the approach now, and there's not an easy solution for that.
There was a previous panel here, and I believe the conversation came up about privacy and artificial intelligence. And I believe it was Greg Vanderheiden that said that in the past, the artificial intelligence was in the cloud, and we're moving to the artificial intelligence being on the device. When we get it to the device, then we'll be able to solve a lot of the privacy issues, and we're in that state in between where we're just hoping we don't lose our complete privacy before we get to that point. Is there another question? We have time, I think, for one more question.
Yeah, so I had a question on the different types of disabilities and how they can be supported or not supported, right? So in some sense, somebody in a wheelchair goes into the VR. They're kind of liberated because they can do a lot of things that they cannot. But being highly visual in nature, if somebody that is blind or low vision goes in, what is their experience? Are they kind of disadvantaged, right? So what is your thinking behind that?
So I was actually talking about this for this. I don't think we know, but I don't think we've actually asked what experiences are people wanting to have in these spaces. The reality is, I have a friend who's blind who said, I could care less about VR. I don't care. It's not, all I will be able to do is hear what's going on, and spatial audio exists right now. So, so I think really what we have to understand is what type of experiences are people wanting to have in VR on the intersections that define us, on our disabilities, on our race. What is it we're wanting out of this technology before we try to solve for it? Because we might be solving something that's just not a market for it.
Yeah, that's really good. Something too is we like to develop a lot on what our assumptions are. And so, like what would be the VR equivalent to a patient I just treated? What would be the VR equivalent to somebody in the blind community? Coming here to CSUN for the first time, I've been just, beating my head against the wall, curious, like what could this be? Being a physical therapy in background is not something that I see or treat on the day-to-day, but it's something I'm very interested in, just wanting to start having these conversations with more people to learn, what would be the equivalent? What would be finally like the aha moment, that big jump when it comes to technology? Just like I've seen VR be that big jump for me in rehab.
Roger?
there are individuals who are deafblind, and they depend on tactile signing to have physical access in VR. Deafblind, there's no physical access for deafblind individuals in VR. So that's a challenge. There's a new field called HRI, human robotic interaction. And I think that's the next phase to connect that human connection to the communication world. There's not just communication, we need to include the physical some way. I think 50 years ago, there was a famous alternate video or alternate virtual reality, and they were talking about having the experience of shooting a gun and bullets to seeing and hearing it, but you adding the feeling. And at some point, it became too real that it will actually kill you. And then could virtual reality do that? So, I mean, it runs the gamut.
I watched a presentation by one researcher from Stanford that was looking at tactile. And his thing was, how do you create like another sense? One of the things he was doing was a vest, and he was sending data to that vest to see if the person could feel the data through his back and make decisions. They never told the person what the data was, but the data was the stock market. Running total of the stock market. And so he was wondering, can someone actually extrapolate like real-time numbers by the feelings on his back? Actually learn that, like a learn new sense. So that might be when you're talking about haptics, that is an artificial experience going with haptics. I believe that we're running up out of time. Oh, wow, we're way over time. I'm sorry, everybody, for the next session. But I want to thank our guests today, Dr. Raja Kushalnagar, Eric Yates, and Mark Barley. Thank you.
Okay, we're back here at the CSUN ATC TV broadcast studio for a roundup of what we've been doing this week, because it's been unbelievable content.
It's been incredible.
I'm here with Mike Paciello, who's the keynote speaker, and I'm Dave Gardy from WebAble TV. Mike, you had 3 sessions, I think, so far?
Yeah, 3. I think I got a couple more tomorrow.
Give us a roundup of some of those, because you had some excellent
Yeah, well, usually I'd like to start, top to bottom for the first session, but the session that we had just before lunch with Chieko Asakawa, Josh Mealy, and Greg Vanderheiden on the visionaries' vision of what they saw in the future, just really, we had a full house here. We saw a literal demonstration of the AI suitcase working here, and folks came up and got to see Chieko do that. It just was a really very interesting, very real discussion about what technology looks like today, what it's going to be, very likely what we can look and see in the future for tomorrow, which, Greg really was talking about the future of interfaces and how much of what we see today still is got this kind of technology adapting or helping the user. Tomorrow, it's going to be more along the lines of technology and interfaces being more personalized and adapting to the user. So the user just have to adapt to the interface. So that's where we're headed there. Josh talked about his work in voice interfaces, and there was an interesting question here about the one woman here who said, I've got an Echo Dot here, and I've got an Alexa over here, and I've got this over there. All these assistive assistants, digital assistants in her house, 4 or 5 in every room. And now when she asks a question, all 5 of them are giving her answers. So she doesn't know what to do. It reminds me of an individual who's blind and has a screen reader, and it keeps going, and they don't know how to tell it to shut up, right? I mean, that's the old command was. So it was really kind of cool to kind of see all of that futuristic notions of things.
And there was a comment about the robotic a guide dog versus the regular guide dog and the disadvantages of both.
Yeah.
Advantages of both.
Yeah, yeah. I think I actually brought that up to Chieko. I said, when I look at this and I watch it, it seems to me like the AI suitcase is going to replace a guide dog. And she came back very quickly and said, no, 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 no. It's not about replacing, it's about choice, right? Because functionally, that suitcase, as it were, is meant to guide and lead, and it can see and detect anything that's in front of it to help her avoid, obstacles or other individuals that are coming on. But it was kind of interesting how she came back and said, no, we're not replacing. It's like robotics, right? We're not replacing humans. We're just giving people a choice of what they can use.
What were some of the other sessions you did?
Yeah, I did the session with Chad Chelios and Dax Castro on their work in training in PDF and documentation accessibility, which again is very practical because a lot of the folks that are here attending the conference are involved in either departments in their offices or in their companies or in education, particularly where the criticality of having accessible documents, electronic documents is really important. And what I appreciated about what they did was they took out all the complexity. Because in fact, having done this work myself in the past, it can be hard to make a document fully accessible to a screen reader or a screen magnifier or other technologies. But they took out all the complexity. That's what they specialize. They specialize in training other organizations how to build accessible documents. If you're making a PDF, that's not the root document. The root document is a Word document or a Google Doc or some other InDesign that they talked about. What you need to do there first to just add structure, basically add structure to it. This is a heading, this is a list, this is a table. And when you do that there, then when it gets output to a PDF, the little bit that's left that still needs to be made accessible as a result of weaknesses, we'll say, of the PDF document or the Acrobat viewer can easily be corrected, especially like reading order. That tends to be a big thing. So I like just the fact that it's very easy, quick approach. They've got their podcast going, they've got a website going, they've got training going galore, and so that's be very useful to a lot of folks that are here.
In the last session you had?
Well, actually, it was the first session, right? This was the session that we had with the Envision glasses, right? So they were the Google glasses, and they added their own little interface, touch interface on the outside, so that blind individuals could use these glasses as a guidance mechanism for them, as well as recognizing and scanning things and getting the information about what they were looking at. I think they really focused on how they could look at documents, and the documents could be read back to them, and they could interact with whatever they were. So you can imagine if I'm a blind person and I'm walking down Central Park or maybe down around Union Station in DC, and I've got signs and things that are going there. This allows them to, use these glasses to gaze. It'll pick up the information, give them the feedback that they need, and give them directions about where they're going to go, what they're going to do.
Yeah, and we had something like that because I've been here for all of these presentations from Good Maps. Good Maps,
right.
Which is scanned this. They got a brand new scanner out. They explained how they walked through. I saw them doing this when we were setting at the production. And those little things on the tripod are all set up, and they've got maps. Then there was an interaction. It was very good feedback from the audience about where people had walked into a certain place and realized that there was a mistake in the map and had to come back. And he says, that's the feedback we need. We go back, we fix the maps. And then this scanning map is now here for a while, here at the Anaheim Marriott. So
yeah.
There's an advantage to that. And he went through the iterative discussion about how they got involved with the technology and how the technology has evolved to become much better than it was 3 or 4 years ago.
It was interesting, actually, yeah. They had mentioned how this had actually started as a research project, right? A research paper, never mind project, it was a research paper. And then they started to ask young people, certain questions about what they wanted, and that led to actually the development of the device itself. So very cool story. It was good to talk to them.
Yeah, that was one session. The first session I did was with T-Mobile, who came out and talked about it. There was a couple theme sessions of this, of bringing inclusivity from the accessibility standpoint into the work environment. And T-Mobile, they didn't want to talk so much about their technology, which is quite interesting, the IP relay they have for purposes of privacy, corporate privacy. But they did talk about what they've gone through and with the cultural changes they've made within T-Mobile, that they think they're farther ahead than anybody else in incorporating accessibility principles and could be a template for other corporations. And I think this is a theme that's gone throughout the conference here. When we've had people, I interviewed a very interesting interview, Monica Goel she's the over there at CVS Health.
Right, you mentioned her, yeah.
She, 4 years ago, CVS Health said, you've got accessibility. She didn't know anything about it. First thing she did was went to Google and looked up accessibility. But she was a computer science and engineering major, and she had built an entire accessibility section within that group there at CVS Health. And CVS Health is huge. It's 300,000 people. She's responsible for incorporating that. And now her department is up to 100 people. And I asked her questions like, well, how do you know when you hire a vendor, and they have thousands of vendors, how do you know they're accessible? She says, well, we worked with the procurement people and we put in a clause in the contract that said, this is the accessibility contract you, the flow down provision probably, would have to comply with if you're going to be a vendor. And I asked her, so, the CVS's and Targets, she says they have a relationship with Target, so that the accessibility from one side, it doesn't change just because you walk into the CVS. It's consistent. She talked a lot about how I was going through the questions ahead of time, and one of the questions down the list was, let me read it. It was, how important is it to ensure that accessibility team is diverse and inclusive? She says, that's the first question you should ask me. I go, okay, so I did. And she goes, if I hadn't done that, that's what she learned, because she wasn't that familiar with accessibility. She had hired a lot of people who had disabilities, and that taught her everything. She said, I couldn't have learned it any other way. And that's the most important reason we're succeeding at CVS Health. She went through a lot of other things like talking about design principles and how she uses a process and a template and actually customizes from other corporations, but just for CVS Health. And so that was a very interesting thing, again, along the theme of incorporating inclusivity of people with accessibility. The other session that was like that from the government side was a State Department session. It was entitled Accessibility at the State Department, where they talked about, again, somebody who came in and said, you've got accessibility, make it happen here at the State Department. So they processed all the accommodations they would have to make to get people with disabilities into the State Department and how it worked throughout the agency as they got promoted to different parts of it. And then it took years to do also, but it was a very interesting thing. Now, all these groups have booths on the floor. The State Department has one, CVS Health, they have one on the floor, and again, they're a huge operation. I thought Aetna bought CVS Health. CVS Health bought Aetna, which is a huge acquisition. Right. But there is this theme now. We saw it in the government, the incorporation of Section 508. Now we're seeing it become the private industry, where these type of things and these programs are happening, and people are putting it in place. It's not happening as fast as everybody wants it to happen, but it's definitely becoming a process now where people, because in the DEI phase, which is very big in Washington, D.C., where I work, the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, now it has A after it for accessibility. And every time we talk to people about it, we see a DEI webinar, we go, where's your accessibility? Right. And now that's starting to happen in the corporations, because they have adopted the DEI principles. There are many DEI companies that support that in the corporations. Well, now what's happening is accessibility is becoming a big part of that. You can't forget that A.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think in my keynote, one of the things that I mentioned, I talked about the accessibility maturity models, and I also talked about the fact that there's a saying amongst individuals that the entire community of people with disabilities. I always forget exactly how this goes. Nothing for us without us, right? And I purposely led the audience, and I said, oh, how's that go? Nothing for, and they completed the whole audience. So that was kind of cool. But that's what these companies like CVS are really all about. They're helping in the State Department. They're realizing that there is a top, bottom, right? Bottom, top, full breadth and width investment in making inclusion a key attribute of the corporate culture, right? So that in time, and you made a good point. It's going to take some time. These changes don't happen overnight. I mean, we think about ADA, and how many years it's been, 30 years since ADA, and we're still trying to make some progress on it. It'll take time to incorporate that into every corporate culture, but once it does, then you get the principles associated with DE&I. Why that in A? Why that is even a thing, right? It's because there's a movement towards being more sensitive, more inclusive, more empathic, I like to say, about all individuals, regardless of what their abilities are or other things as they include diversity and inclusion.
And it's going to take some time, and you use the government as a model, because when we first were captioning video streaming, we were one of the first companies to be able to do it back in the early 2000s when GSA was purposely using our techniques along with WGBH to educate the agencies on complying with Section 508, which was have to caption any video thing. And there were all these other regulatory issues that you had to get through before. All the agencies now are pretty much compliant, and some more than others. NASA has its issues, but I mean, for the most part, where does it stand in the government from your perspective?
Yeah, well,
it's better than it was in 2004.
Yeah. Although I'll be honest with you, we were taking great strides forward, really making good, aggressive progress that was measurable. But let me give you a good example why I'm a little hesitant to say we're right back in and we're making great progress. As you know, I was the co-chair of the Section 508 committee, and one of the outgrowths of that committee, and one of the action items that came out of that was that every state agency was required to report their progress every 2 years to the Department of Justice. That was part of the mandate. That was part of the FAR that came out and did that. And it worked the first 2 times that it was supposed to. And then for 8 years, nothing, no reports. That only got revealed this past summer by Senator Casey, who, as he was working as, I think he's the chair of the Veterans Committee, Oversight Committee, found out because they were getting so many complaints about the VA and the website, and veterans were not able to get in and use the site because of whatever disabilities that they had. Found out that the site was no longer, it had been, but was no longer usable and accessible, and it certainly wasn't 508 compliant. Long story short, after they did an investigation, they found out no one has been, well, I shouldn't say no one, there's no absolutes, but most of the federal agencies were not issuing those reports. There was no notion of progress. No one knew where anyone was. So, fortunately, they caught that. They raised the flag. All of the agencies now are working on getting those reports. But that's why I'm saying things could be. We lost 8 years. I mean, that's a decade to me, right? A decade in this time is a lot. When you measure things according to internet time, a decade is like 1,000 years.
And you mentioned the Department of Justice. An interesting anomaly that occurred during the whole process was if an agency wasn't compliant, somebody would report it to the Department of Justice.
Right.
And then what would happen is the agency that was responsible for defending the agency was the Department of Justice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that process, I think, I don't know what's happened with that. Is that still the way it is?
It's crazy. They're still working it through, and I watch it as things are going. But there's still a lot of work
it's
there.
trickling down to the corporate side, and the corporations are incorporating the DEIA principles.
Exactly. Just coming back to our studio here and the shows that we had. So we're seeing that kind of progress being made on the public, on the private level, and it was modeled by the federal agencies, by the federal government, not just here. It's Europe and Canada, Australia, a lot of good models for programs at that level. So it was good to hear and let our audience also hear what kind of progress is being made. Everybody's changing from Rite Aid to CVS now, right?
Right.
It's just a joke. And it's just a joke.
But you mentioned veterans too, and there was a group here that was called Quality of Life Plus, and what they do, they're on the floor also. Go talk to them. They go to veterans that have special needs and need an innovative solution to having lost a limb or whatever their problem is. And what they do is they go to colleges and get college engineering students, mostly mechanical engineering students, to come out and design solutions for them. And the colleges and the faculties participate, and they've done over 1,000 projects since 2009. It's a phenomenal story, and the college students get a lot out of it. The veterans get a lot out of it because they get a solution to their problem, and they're growing by leaps and bounds, but they're always looking for more development money. And I'm going to suggest my alma mater, the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy,
Right.
does it because Annapolis is doing it. But it's
Sure.
a lot of private colleges are already supporting it by providing the college students and giving them credit. It's a full year process to develop a project for a veteran.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So it's a win-win in a number of situations, right? For the college student, they're learning, they're putting into practice what they're being taught. For the veterans, they're getting solutions to some of the issues that they're dealing with. Especially regarding their disabilities. So,
And that's
yeah, it's a great thing.
qualitylifeplus.com or qlplus.com is the website. They're on the floor. Go see them. Of course, Accessibility Oz was here talking about the
Gian
differences
was
in the
there.
accessibility markets, and it turned into a cultural description between Australia and the U.S. And Cheryl from Accessibility Oz, she's an American who's now lived down there 20 years, has a Minnesota accent. And they talked a lot about the differences in the accessibility markets and what is acceptable. And then but they turned into a cultural discussion between about what's acceptable and, who's on time more, the Americans or the Australians. But it was an excellent video. And I want to mention this because all these videos we're talking about, everything we shot this week and everything that we're going to produce tomorrow will be at the CSUN YouTube channel as it is now, as we're going out on right now. Now, tomorrow we've got... well, first of all, the next session after this is virtual reality as modality from a sales and therapist perspective. Interesting comment in the last, a guy had a friend who's blind. He goes, virtual reality means nothing to me because I can, even if it's audio, I can already hear, what's going on. So tomorrow it's changing daily lives of children and adults battling with dyslexia. The results of the future of interface and accessibility workshop. Accessibility Trends by IBM, and how the blind life came to be known, the blind life being a very popular podcast.
Right.
And he's going to be here, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of people in the room from his fans that are here. So quite a first time we've done this CSUN ATC TV broadcast studio, and WebAble TV is pleased to have the opportunity to produce this. And turn it over to you for last thoughts.
Yeah, well, look, I'm looking forward to tomorrow. I frankly know the results of the future of interface and accessibility workshop. That's Greg Vanderheiden and what they did with he and Vint Cerf, who was one of the major contributors to the invention of the internet in itself. So I attended that particular conference myself, and some of the thoughts that came out of it were just outstanding. So I'm looking forward to that. But like you said, this is our first year. We've had some good audiences here. We've had some great shows. We're looking forward to taking this into next year's conference and a lot more participation and make it a success for CSUN. They deserve it, and we're just trying to bring things to our friends and colleagues here.
And we want to thank our online audience that's been with us the whole time, and several hundred throughout the last 3 days. And again, it's at the CSUN YouTube channel. Go take a look. So I'm Dave Gardy for the CSUN ATC TV Roundup. Thanks for joining us here at CSUN.
All right, everybody. Well, I guess we're going to go ahead and get started here. So we're bringing up a pretty unique topic, especially for CSUN. It's been a great conference, and it's actually our first time here. But it's been really awesome, especially coming from an assistive technology in the form of like a physical modality. So for physical rehabilitation. So it's been really awesome being here and learning about these new communities. But one thing we wanted to talk about today was just kind of some insights in what we have learned from using virtual reality within a rehab space, both from like a therapy perspective as well as from a sales perspective. So we don't have too much that we're going to be presenting, but what we wanted to do was also just kind of have the conversation with you guys. If there's any questions that you guys would have in relation to this, we'd love to get to that. But yeah, so there will be a time for questions here at the end. But I kind of just want to go ahead and introduce myself, and then I'll pass it on over here to my colleagues. So my name is Eric Yates. I'm the Director of Clinical Strategy with Neuro Rehab VR, which is the virtual reality rehabilitation tool. So I've been using virtual reality in treatment as a physical therapist assistant for a little over 5 years now. And it's hard to imagine not using virtual reality in treatment today. So that's a little bit about me. I'll go and pass it on to you.
Of course, I'm Megan. I am the Business Development Manager here at Neuro Rehab VR. I have never treated with virtual reality, but I have been working for the company for about 1.5 years and kind of just getting to see how virtual reality does change some people's lives, and it's been pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's great. It's great to hear. So, Megan, if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of start off with a question for you. So, when it comes to the sales side, I have 3 questions. So, the first question, from your perspective, what's kind of the trend that you have been seeing over the past, 1.5 years or so?
Of course. Well, 1.5 years ago, nobody knew what virtual reality was. I have to credit a certain big company for that a lot, because they've produced a lot of commercials recently that have helped us out dramatically. But so initially, I started off having to explain the basics of virtual reality and what it is, and just as a concept. And we've kind of moved on to people now coming to me saying, I know what virtual reality is. Explain to me what makes you so good at rehab. And it's been a really nice shift over this past 1.5 years.
On that.
Yeah, of course. One of the biggest hurdles is changing everyone's notion that it's all for gaming. Virtual reality is so much more than just gaming, and it's so much more than just our company as well. There's trainings, there's so much you can do with virtual reality. So getting rid of everyone's idea that it's just for gaming, specifically with the aging population, is really important. 99% of the time, though, once they get into a virtual reality headset, they're like, oh, this is so much fun, but I'm sweating now. And I didn't expect to be working this hard while I was doing my therapy.
Yeah, I love that too. Coming from a background, if for anybody who's listening that maybe went to one of my other talks, I have been playing games for a very long time and used to be quite heavily addicted for a time period. But yeah, I don't ever remember sweating, by gaming. So that's kind of that kind of shows you that VR truly is much more than just gaming. It's truly so much more than just entertainment. But it really can transform our patients' lives. So one more question for you, Megan. So we kind of spoke of a hurdle of just trying to get people to wrap their minds around what VR can be and its potential. What would you say, other than that, what would you say is maybe stopping maybe a major hospital system from just instantly adopting VR, other than just wrapping their heads around it not being for gaming?
I would say the next largest hurdle would have it to be, every hospital system in the world has a huge IT process that you do have to go through that takes months and months and months. And outside of that, it would be, do they have the funding to introduce really brand new technology? Especially post-COVID, lots of hospitals are running tight on cash, and they have to be really strategic with what they're buying next. Yeah,
that is true. And just like you said, every hospital system, they really can be so different, in what funds they have available, when is that, and when is it available? It may be there, but maybe the timing just isn't quite right. And then just to speak a little bit on the IT side, it's really funny because that's one of the hurdles you don't really think about. Is with a new rehab piece, normally they buy the piece of technology and it's there in the clinic, right? That's kind of it. But with virtual reality and augmented reality, and just as this different kind of extended reality technology continues to increase and become widely available, I really do feel like that is a hurdle that a lot of people are gonna have to gonna come to see, that it's like, wow, this is not what I expected initially. When trying to integrate into a hospital system. So yeah, that's good. I'd like to open up any questions, though, about kind of the sales side and stuff that we've talked about, if anybody has any questions on that. But if not, we can just go ahead and we can kind of move on to the physical rehab side of things. All right. Well, we can go ahead and just move on, and that's totally fine by me. So, so Megan, I'll go ahead and give it to you if you want to just ask some questions about kind of the physical rehab side, and go for it.
Yeah, of course. So one big one, Eric has had the honor of kind of being with the company from the start. So could you just kind of speak to, the past 5-6 years and the major changes that have been happening in the world of virtual reality?
Yeah, that would be great. In some of my other talks, I'd kind of mentioned that from kind of like 2017 onwards, there's just been mass, rapid expansion of virtual reality studies and virtual reality devices. And I was very, very blessed and very happy to be able to be a part of that early kind of expansion and that early growth in rehab for that. So, starting at the very beginning of things, it was a lot of retrofitting entertainment-based exercises for rehab purposes. So say, you would take maybe a VR exercise that is about, let's say, solving a puzzle. Okay, so solving a puzzle. Well, to retrofit this exercise is that instead of maybe using both controllers to solve this puzzle, I would almost make like a stroke patient solve this puzzle with only their affected side, so like their affected hand or their affected leg. So even though the exercise wasn't designed to be done that way, I was able to do that just through my own creativity and through my own just exploration of that VR exercise. Kind of going on from there, at least regarding neuro rehab VR, there was a lot more specific rehab exercises that were starting to be created that were solely based around patients' activities of daily living, their functional goals that they were trying to hit on the day-to-day, as well as just what are some things even for the future that maybe they would like to try to do. So I instead of retrofitting exercises, I began to use exercises geared directly towards the repetition or the ability to constantly repeat these functional movements that were related to their goals. So, therapy began to be just more subjective to the patient. And that's kind of where we are today. Just the library of exercises that me as a therapist and other therapists around the world are able to use now are a lot more highly specific. So there's not as much of that creativity and retrofitting of exercises, needed anymore. So.
Awesome. I'm also hoping you can kind of expand, as a clinician, what do you like about using virtual reality? How has it helped you? And if you want to also kind of talk to what differences you were seeing in your patients post introducing virtual reality.
Yeah, so as a clinician, it sounds funny saying this, but it almost has made my job easier when it comes to just neurorehabilitation. A couple of big reasons is the automated data acquisition, so functional reaching measures are automatically being tracked for me. And different functional goals have data automatically just tracking for that without me having to write it down on a sheet of paper. So it's already made my job a little bit easier in that aspect, which has also given some of my patients even more insight and knowledge into their journey, into their progress of rehabilitation, which has been very interesting. And kind of, going on from there, another way that has just made me super thankful to even be able to use it is the fact that when we tap into our day-to-day lives, we have those days where we're just not quite feeling it, right? Say we just got back from a long vacation, or maybe there was a potluck up at work. I'm tired, it's lunchtime. I know it's my duty to treat, it is my duty to give the patients my all in pursuit of their functional goals, but man, it is hard to find that motivation, right? Well, one thing about VR that has been incredibly helpful is that regardless of my mental state and regardless of how I'm feeling, the VR environment is the exact same. It is constant. It has the same ability to facilitate them to pursue these functional goals and to do these exercises regardless of how I'm feeling that day, which is incredible. So that's kind of the second big thing that makes me thankful, as a therapist, and yes, it made my job easier. And now when it comes to just general patient reaction, and this is one thing I love so much about treating with virtual reality, is that although they do have a headset on, I'm still very much present with them. And one thing I get to see as a therapist is from the outside, I get to see just their whole like body language, their whole just aura even begin to change. I see a lot more, just a lot more hope and excitement and energy than I had seen previously with some of my patients who have been doing kind of the same thing, over and over and over again. And so, and one thing I'm never going to forget, and this is something that is truly ingrained in my mind, is the first time I had a patient doing an exercise that we have at Neuro Rehab VR, where they're dodging cannonballs being launched at them. I'll never forget when I had a patient who had goals to work on standing balance and just general leg strengthening. And I'll never forget the experience. As soon as we got done doing about 3 sets of that, just the sheer look of joy when I popped the headset off. Their eyes were just so bright. There was so much excitement in them, and they were just so ready to then go and tell their family. They were so ready to, when they got home, to start trying and challenging themselves to try to get up more often, to work on certain outcome measures that we were working on, like the timed up and go score. So how quickly from sitting could they stand up, get in their walker, and then take off. So it was awesome to see somebody so excited about something, to be honest, so boring as a piece of paper that says, hey, let's see how fast you can stand up. So yeah, so just utilizing virtual reality, seeing how it has just improved the patient experience, it's just been incredible. And it just has just this anecdotal, just in my, my own experience, it's just anecdotally kind of even just increase the patient's motivation to not have therapy for the rest of their life. They're motivated, they want to continue to work hard so that we don't have to see each other ever again, right? They can go out, they can live their life, they can do what they, what they need to do, and what they want to do, what their goals are in life. So,
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
All right, and then I think it's really important to touch on, what were your kind of apprehensions of introducing virtual reality? And, when you do have a patient that you have a hard time getting into it, how do you handle that?
Yeah. So I'm going to take the last question first. So just as a therapist, one thing that's incredibly important, and I feel like this can also be used for almost any new experience, is to never create a strong bias. So, say when I go into a room, I don't try to give my patient a thought process that I want them to think. Instead, I try to present it from a very objective standpoint. No, just like, hey, today we're gonna go do some exercises, but we're gonna leave the gym today. We're gonna put on a pair of glasses or a pair of goggles, and we're gonna do some workouts in here. So by presenting it this way, I'm not like, hey, we're gonna play some video games today. Hope you're ready. Or I'm not like, okay, we're gonna try a new piece of technology. It might be a little scary at first. So I'm not creating this like accidental apprehension to this device. Instead, I'm just like, hey, I treat it as casually as possible, as if it's just another day in therapy, because truly, it's just another day in therapy. I'm just lucky enough to have a new tool that we can use. So now let's talk about just apprehensions, like you had kind of mentioned at first. And after I go over this, we can open up another round of questions. We're happy to kind of be done early, but so some of my apprehensions when it came to treating with virtual reality really just comes from my history of kind of being a little bit addicted to that virtual escapism of gaming and virtual escapism of movies and those kinds of things. But, after getting into VR and experiencing it, definitely my mindset changed a little bit. So my initial apprehension really is non-existent, nowadays. But that was definitely the initial apprehension, was just like, what if this experience, maybe it seems, too real, and maybe they don't want to get out of it. Maybe they're just so thrilled to be completely out of their normal day-to-day life that maybe they don't want to, really return. Like, what if something psychosocially could be going on like that? So that was definitely a big fear. But after realizing how short spurts in virtual reality with very high goals, how it's addictive in the sense that they want to keep working out rather than they just want to stay and just immerse themselves in VR forever. So my initial apprehension really was kind of just, I guess, me being for lack of a better phrase, a worrywart, okay, of using a new piece of technology. So yeah, great questions, Megan. So yeah, I'd love to, if anybody else has any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Our time is definitely yours. Like, I know this is a little bit different than what's normally at CSUN, but we want to be just a good, a good resource for you guys if y'all have any other questions. All right. Well, yep, I guess we can go and call it good. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, for coming out. Thank you guys for for listening to this. I hope it's been kind of insightful. Like I said, I know it's kind of unique, but yeah, thanks Megan for for sharing some insights into the sales. And,
No problem.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you guys.